Hello, I'm Ranger Kelsey. Thank you for tuning in for this special interview. I had the pleasure of sitting down with local historian and author Jimmy Richardson to discuss his new book, Slavery at the River's Edge. This book explores African American history in Paterson, New Jersey. During our time, Jimmy and I discussed Paterson's Underground Railroad operations. Our conversation is just a brief overview on what you can read in Slavery at the River's Edge. Paterson Great Falls National Historical Park is proud to have been a part of Jimmy's journey to research and write this book. Without further ado, Jimmy Richardson.
My name is Jimmy Richardson. I'm a public historian, and my historic interest is in the African American presence here in Paterson, New Jersey. My historic research is really centered around the Great Falls and how the Passaic River played a major part in actually building the African American community. I've written a book called Slavery at the River's Edge, and I hope that you will find this book very interesting and informative. There are a number of stories legendary stories that people have never heard of or don't fully know or understand. So this book is basically a book of rediscovery in some instances. I hope you enjoy this production. Thank you. Got started with this book is because first and foremost I was born and raised in the city of Paterson, educated and religiously trained in this city. And some years ago, and I had an opportunity to work on an anniversary souvenir journal for one of the local churches and African American churches, only to find out I could not find any or very little information in mainstream libraries available to do this journal. So I started doing some research, and in doing that research, I started uncovering a lot of information and half-told stories about the African American community. And in some instances, those stories were things that I could actually relate to. I won't tell you how old I am, but I can remember as a little boy some of the things that I did research, and I can vividly remember those sights and those places and those sounds. Paterson's Underground Railroad really gets started about 1848. Although there are many different components to the Underground Railroad, and namely the American Anti-Slavery Society, in which they were here in Paterson. And I must tell you, the Anti-Slavery Society was founded by one of the founders was Frederick Douglass. And by 1841, there were 1,200 anti-slavery societies within the eastern part of the United States. And again, Paterson just happened to be one of them. 1841, they had the New Jersey State Anti-Slavery Society Convention here in Paterson. Now, why that's important is because it starts building the foundation for what the Underground Railroad would be here in Paterson. There are about 60 Underground Railroad sites in the state of New Jersey. Paterson would make 61. And it's really unfortunate that, and you will hear this, and you may have heard it time and time again, that the Underground Railroad is a clandestine agency, and it's a clandestine thing, and it was hidden and nobody was supposed to know. That is most certainly true. But it's true with a hyphen. And the other part of the hyphen has to do with the fact that even though it was clandestine, it was wide open. Everybody knew it existed. They didn't necessarily know how it worked. They didn't exactly know where it was and they didn't know who ran it. One geographical point about the Underground Railroad, if you do any research, you'll find that the Underground Railroad network, just about in every place you go where there's an Underground Railroad stop, there's a river nearby. Not only is there a river, there's an African American church. And most likely, it would be an African Methodist African Methodist Episcopal Church or an African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. The churches played a major role in the Underground Railroad as not only stopovers but post offices. It was a place where not only you could get refuge, but they helped to move you along. Paterson becomes a very important place, and it's very interesting that even today, that not many people, it has been a site in a town that has been overlooked with the Underground Railroad. And it's been overlooked for a number of reasons. The biggest reason is the fact that the Underground Railroad was operated by, the majority of the people who operated were industrialists who had the means and the power and the means to keep their clandestine movements quiet. African Americans or free black people already living here in Paterson. And as a matter of fact, in the 1824 census, there is a woman whose name is Isabel Benson. She lived on White Street here in Paterson. Now, what makes her address unique is because in 1824, Paterson was part of Bergen County. And the dividing line was, here we go, the Passaic River. That was the dividing line. But it was still considered Paterson. The other thing that makes why the enslaved could move freely and is because a lot of the enslaved people who were slaves were involved with the Dutch Reformed Church, and specifically in this area, the Totowa Dutch Reformed Church. And if you look at the church baptismal records, you will see that there were slaves and free blacks actually baptized into the Dutch or Totowa Dutch Reformed Church. Now, why that is really interesting is because most of those free blacks and slaves, they were trilingual. They could speak the mother tongue, they could speak Dutch, and they could speak English, which made them extremely valuable for the Underground Railroad. You know, they could talk to people. They could do many things. One particular story about a gentleman who owned a businessman downtown Paterson on the corner of Main Street and Broadway, and he owned a stable. He also owned an oyster bar, and he also owned a hotel. And what he used to do to help the enslaved get out of Paterson is he would put together a string of horses or to sell, and he would always sell. He was selling them south, or he was selling somewhere else. And he would take these enslaved people, and again, hiding in plain sight, he would take these enslaved people, put them on the wagon as if they were delivering this string of horses. And of course, the funny part of it is not only did the wagon never return, the horses never returned, and neither did the slaves. So that was just one of the ways that they were helping the enslaved get out of Paterson. So Paterson was unique in that way that African Americans, and I keep saying African American, people were accustomed to seeing them. They were accustomed to seeing black people downtown. There's another piece of information that's very interesting. In the 1850s, and again, we're talking pre-Fugitive Slave Act, it has been reported and recorded that African Americans around Christmas time, and of course all throughout the year, they would be downtown Paterson shopping and doing things just like today. And which says that Paterson was a pretty liberal city when it comes to African Americans being here. People were used to seeing African Americans in Paterson, which makes it another place that is easy to move the enslaved or the refugees or out of Paterson. Another way that makes Paterson great is because it is the first industrial city in the country, of course founded by Alexander Hamilton. And of course with that industrialization, what happens is the need for manpower. The need for manpower becomes so great because you have so many different industries developing and forming in Paterson. So you have the river systems, the industrialists, the trains, the Garrett Mountain. You have a lot of factors that make this really a really unique place other than maybe any place in South Jersey. And why it's different than South Jersey? South Jersey was most certainly agricultural, with the exception of Trenton and Perth Amboy, and possibly Camden. But I know Trenton, New Brunswick, and Camden, and Perth Amboy were really extremely important. Why Perth Amboy is because Perth Amboy was a port of call, which a lot of slaves came in to New Jersey through Perth Amboy, New Jersey. Now, with that being said, here we go with that the moving of people, and with moving of people that has to do with industry, that has to do with labor. The moving of people made it very easy, or easier, to hide the enslaved people in plain sight.
We hope you enjoyed this insightful conversation. For more information about Jimmy Richardson's book, Slavery at the River's Edge, please visit our website. We hope this video has inspired you to continue to explore Black history and cultural heritage in national parks and communities across the country.